Crime and Punishment, Part 2, Subsection 2. And what if there has already been a search? What if I find him there now? But here was his room. Nobody and nothing. No one had been there. Even Nastasia had not touched anything. But Lord, how could he have left all those things in that hole? He rushed to the corner, thrust his hand under the wallpaper, and began pulling the things out and loading them into his pockets. There turned out to be 8 articles altogether, 2 small boxes with earrings or something of the sort. He did not look closely. Then 4 small morocco cases. One chain was simply wrapped in newspaper. There was something else in newspaper, apparently a medal. He stowed them all in different pockets of his coat, and in the remaining right pocket of his trousers, trying to make them less conspicuous. He took the purse as well, together with the things. Then he went out of the room, this time leaving the door wide open. He walked quickly and firmly, and though he felt broken all over, his consciousness remained with him. He was afraid of being followed, afraid that within half an hour, within a quarter of an hour, instructions would be issued to keep a watch on him. So, meanwhile, he had at all costs to cover his traces. He had managed it, but he had managed it. He had to manage it, while he still had at least some strength and some judgment. But where to go? He had long since decided. Throw everything into the canal. Kennel. I can't even say the word. And the water will wash it all away. And the water will wash away all traces. And that will be the end of it. He decided so during the night, in delirium, in those moments when, as he remembered, he had made several attempts to rise up and go quickly, and throw it all away. But throwing it away turned out to be very difficult. He wandered along the embankment of the Ekaterininsky Canal for half an hour, perhaps longer, and several times cast an eye at the landing steps as he passed by them. But he could not even think of carrying out his intention. Either rafts were standing there and washerwomen were doing laundry on them, or boats were moored there, and people were simply swarming all over the place. Besides, he could be seen, he could be noticed from anywhere along the embankments, from all sides. A man coming down on purpose, stopping and throwing something into the water, would look suspicious. And if the cases floated instead of sinking, yes, of course they would float. Everyone would see them. Indeed, they all kept staring at him as it was, looking him over as if he were their only concern. Why is that? Or does it just seem so to me? He thought. Finally, it occurred to him that it might be better to go somewhere along the Neva. There were fewer people. It would not be so conspicuous. In any case, it would be more convenient. And above all, it was farther away from those parts. And suddenly he was amazed. How could he have wandered for a whole half an hour in anguish and anxiety, and in dangerous places, and not thought of it before? And he had killed a whole half an hour over such a foolhardy matter because he had decided on it in his sleep, in delirium. He was becoming extremely distracted and forgetful, and he knew it. He decidedly had to hurry. He walked along the V Prospect in the direction of the Neva, but on the way another thought suddenly came to him. Why the Neva? Why in the water? Wouldn't it be better to go somewhere very far away, even to the islands again, and there somewhere in some solitary place, in the woods, under a bush, to bury it all, and also make a note of it, and maybe also make a note of the tree. And though he thought he could not consider it all clearly and soberly at the moment, it seemed a flawless idea. But he was not destined to go to the islands either. Something else happened. Coming out of V Prospect to the square, he saw on his left the entrance to the courtyard, surrounded by completely blank walls. To the right, immediately inside the gateway, the blank, unwhitewashed wall of the 4-storied house next door stretched back deep into the yard. To the left, parallel to the blind wall and also just beyond the gate, a wooden fence extended about 20 paces into the yard and only then broke to the left. This was a fenced-off, out-of-the-way spot where some materials were lying about. Deeper into the yard, from behind the fence, the angle of a low, sooty stone shed peeked out, evidently part of some workshop. It was probably a carriage maker's or a metal worker's shop, or something of the sort. Everything starting almost from the gate, was covered with black coal dust. Why not abandon it here and go away? Suddenly crossed his mind. Not noticing anyone in the yard, he stepped through the gate and saw, just inside, a trough set up. Trough or trough? I don't know. A no, it's Trough. A trough set up next to the fence, such as one finds them in places where there are many factory workers, teamsters, coachmen, and so on. And written in chalk on the fence above the trough was the inevitable witticism in such circumstances: "No loitering here." That was already a good thing. It meant there would be nothing suspicious about his going in and loitering. Just dump it all in a heap somewhere and get out. Having looked around one more time, he already put his hand into his pocket when he suddenly noticed, up to the outside wall, between the gate and the trough, where the whole space was a little more than 2 feet wide, a big, unhewn stone, weighing perhaps 50 pounds, leaning right against the stone street wall. The the sidewalk, were just beyond this wall. One could hear passers-by, always numerous there, shuttling back and forth. Yet he could not be seen from outside the gate, but only if someone were to come in from the street, which, however, might very well happen, and therefore he had to hurry. He bent down, gripped the top of the stone firmly with both hands, gathered all his strength, and rolled it over. The stone had made a shallow depression. He at once began throwing all the contents of his pockets into it. The purse ended up on top, and there was still some room in the depression. Then he took a hold of the stone again, and with one heave, rolled it back onto its former side, so that it ended up exactly in its former place. Only it seemed perhaps just a tiny bit higher. But he raked up some dirt and tamped it around the edges with his foot. Nothing could be noticed. He went out and headed for the square. Again, as that morning in the office, a strong, almost unbearable joy possessed him for a moment. The traces are covered, and who would think of looking under that stone? It may have been lying there since the house was built, and may go on lying there as long again. And even if they find it, who will think of me? It's finished, no evidence. And he laughed. Yes, he remembered afterwards that he laughed a rapid, nervous, inaudible, drawn-out laugh, and went on laughing all the while he was crossing the square. But when he turned down K Boulevard, where he met that girl 2 days before, his laughter suddenly went away. Other thoughts started creeping into his head. He also suddenly fancied that it was terribly loathsome now for him to pass that bench where he had sat and pondered then, after the girl left, and that it would also be terribly difficult for him to meet that mustached officer again, the one to whom he had given the 20 kopecks. Devil take him! He walked on, looking distractedly and spitefully about him. All his thoughts were now circling, and around some one main point, and he himself felt that it was indeed the main point, and that now, precisely now, he was left face to face with this main point, even for the first time after 2 months. Ah, devil take it all! He thought suddenly, in a fit of inexhaustible spite. So, if it's begun, it's begun. To hell with her, and with the new life. Lord, how stupid it is! And all the lying and grovelling I produced today. How repulsively I fawned and flirted today with that nasty Ilya Petrovitch. Ah, but that's nonsense, too. I spit on them, and on everyone, and on my own fawning and flirting. That's not it. Not it at all. Suddenly he stopped. A new, totally unexpected, and extremely simple question all at once bewildered and bitterly astonished him. If indeed this whole thing was done consciously and not foolheadedly, if you indeed had a definite and firm objective, then how is it that so far you have not even looked into the purse, and do not know what you've actually gained, or for what you accepted all these torments and started out on such a mean, nasty, vile business? Weren't you going to throw it into the water just now, this purse, all along with the other things, which you also haven't sinned? Yet, how is that? Yes, it was all true. It was all true. However, he had known it before, and it was by no means a question for him. And when the decision had been made that night to throw it all into the water, it had been made without any hesitation or objection. but in such a way as if it had to be so, as if it even could not be otherwise. Yes, he knew all that, and he remembered it all. It had just been about it had been just about decided yesterday, at the very moment when he was sitting over the trunk, pulling the cases out of it. Yes, it was true. It's because I'm very sick, he finally decided glumly. I've tormented and tortured myself without knowing myself what I'm doing. And yesterday, and that day before yesterday, and all this time I've been torturing myself. I'll get well and stop torturing myself. And what if I never get well? Lord, I'm so tired of it all. He walked on without stopping. He longed terribly for some distraction, but he did not know what to do or what to undertake. One new, insurmountable sensation was gaining possession of him almost minute by minute. It was a certain boundless, almost physical loathing for everything he met or saw around him. An obstinate, spiteful, hate-filled loathing. All the people he met were repulsive to him. Their faces, their walk, their movements were repulsive. If anyone had spoken to him, he would probably just have spat at him, bitten him. When he walked out to the embankment of the Little Neva on Vasilyevsky Island, near the bridge, he suddenly stopped. Here's where he lives. In that house, he thought. I seem to have brought myself to Razumikin. The same story all over again. It's very curious, however. Did I mean to come, or did I simply walk and end up here? Makes no difference, I said. I said, 2 days ago, that I go and see him the day after that. Well, so I'll go, as if I couldn't go now. He went up to Razumikin's on the fifth floor. He was at home, in his closet, busy writing at the moment, and opened the door himself. They had not seen each other for about 4 months. Razumikin stood there in a dressing gown worn to tatters, with shoes on his bare feet, disheveled, unshaved, and unwashed. His face showed surprise. What's with you? He cried, looking his entering friend over from head to foot. Then he paused and whistled. It's that bad, is it? You've even outdone me, brother, he added, looking at Raskolnikov's rags. Sit down, you must be tired. And when he collapsed onto the oilcloth Turkish sofa, which was even worse than his own, Razumikin suddenly noticed that his guest was ill. But you're seriously ill, do you know that? He began feeling his pulse. Raskolnikov pulled his hand back. Don't, he said. I've come. The thing is, I have no lessons. I want it, however. I don't need any lessons. You know what? You're raving, observed Razumikin, who was watching him closely. No, I'm not raving. Raskolnikov got up from the sofa. It had not occurred to him, as he was going upstairs to Razumikin's, that he would therefore have to come face to face with him. But now, in an instant, he realized from his earlier experience that he was least of all disposed at the moment to come face to face with anyone in the whole world, whoever it might be. All his bile rose up in him. He nearly choked with anger at himself as soon as he crossed Razumikin's threshold. Goodbye, he said suddenly, and went to the door. But wait, you crank? Don't, the latter repeated, pulling his hand back again. And why the devil did you come then? Are you cracked or something? I'm almost hurt. I won't let you go like that. Well, listen, I came to you because, aside from you, I don't know anyone who would help. To start, because you're kinder than the rest of them, smarter, that is, and you're able to talk about things. But now I see that I need nothing, do you hear? Absolutely nothing, no favors, no concern from anyone. I myself alone. And enough, let me be, all of you. But wait a minute, you chimney sweep. This is completely crazy. You can do as you like for all I care. You see, I don't have any lessons either, and to hell with it. But there's a bookseller in the flea market named Cherubimov, and he's a sort of lesson in himself. I wouldn't exchange him now for 5 merchants' lessons. He does a bit of publishing, brings out little books on natural science, and how they sell. The titles alone are priceless. Now you've always maintained that I'm stupid. By God, brother, there are some that are stupider. And lately he's also hooked onto the trend. He doesn't know beans about it, but well, naturally, I encourage him. Now, here we have 2 sheets and a bit more of German text. The stupidest sort of charlatanism, in my opinion. In short, it examines whether woman is or is not a human being. Well, and naturally it solemnly establishes that she is a human being. Cherubimov is preparing it in line with the woman question. I'm doing the translating. He'll stretch the 2.5 sheets to 6. We'll concoct a nice, frilly title half a page long, and peddle it for 50 kopecks. It'll do. I'll get 60 rubles a sheet for the translation, making it 15 rubles in all. I'll get 6 rubles a sheet for the translation, making it 15 rubles in all, and I took 6 rubles in advance. That done, we'll start translating something about whales. Then we've marked out some of the dullest gossip from the second part of the Confessions for translation. Somebody told Cherubimov that Rousseau is simply a Radishchev in his own way. Naturally, I don't contradict. Devil take him. So, do you want to translate the second sheet of Is Woman a Human Being? If you do, take the text right now. Take some pens and paper. It's all supplied. And take 3 rubles, because I took the advance for the whole translation, first and second sheets. So 3 rubles would be exactly your share. When you finish the sheet, you'll get another 3 rubles. And one more thing, please. Don't regard this as some sort of favor on my part. On the contrary, the moment you walked in, I already saw how you're going to be of use to me. First of all, my spelling is poor, and second, my German just goes kaput sometimes, so that I have to make things up on my own instead. My only consolation being that it comes out even better. But who knows, maybe it comes out worse instead of better. Are you going to take it or not? Raskolnikov silently took the German pages of the article, took the 3 rubles, and walked out without saying a word. Razumikin gazed after him in astonishment, but having gone as far as the first line, Raskolnikov suddenly turned back, went up to Razumikin's again, placed both German pages and 3 rubles on the table, and again walked out without saying a word. Have you got brain fever or what? Razumikin bellowed, finally enraged. What is this farce you're playing? You've even got me all screwed up. Ah, the devil. What did you come for then? I don't want translations, Raskolnikov muttered, already going down the stairs. What the devil do you want? Razumikin shouted from above. The other silently went on down. Hey, where are you living? There was no answer. Ah, the devil. But Raskolnikov was already outside. On the Nikolaevsky bridge, he was at once more brought fully back to his senses, owing to an incident that was most unpleasant for him. He was stoutly lashed on the back with a whip. He was stoutly lashed on the back with a whip by the driver of a carriage, for almost falling under the horse's hoofs, even after the driver had shouted to him 3 or 4 times. The stroke of whip made him so angry that, as he jumped to the railing, for some unknown reason he had been walking in the very middle of the bridge, which is for driving, not for walking. He snarled and bared his teeth spitefully. Of course, there was laughter around him. He had it coming, some kind of scuffle. You know, they pretend they're drunk and get under the wheels on purpose, and then you have to answer for it. They live for it, my good sir, they live for it. But at that moment, as he stood by the railing, rubbing his back and still senselessly and spitefully watching the carriage drive by, he suddenly felt someone put money in his hand. He looked. It was an elderly merchant's wife in kerchief and goatskin shoes, with a girl beside her in a little hat and holding a green parasol, probably her daughter. Take it, my dear, in Christ's name. He took it, and they went on. It was a 20 kopeck piece. From his clothes and appearance, they could well have taken him for a beggar, for a real collector of half kopecks in the street, and the offering of so much as 20 kopecks he doubtless owed to the stroke of the whips having moved them to pity. He clutched the 20 kopecks in his hand, walked about 10 steps, and turned his face to the Neva, in the direction of the palace. There was not the least cloud in the sky, and the water was almost blue, which rarely happened with the Neva. The dome of the cathedral, which is not outlined so well from any other spot as when looked at from here, on the bridge, about 20 paces from the chapel, was simply shining, and through the clear air one could even make out each of its ornaments distinctly. The pain from the whip subsided, and Raskolnikov forgot about the blow. One troublesome and not entirely clear thought now occupied him exclusively. He thought and looked around him. He stood and looked long and intently into the distance. This place was especially familiar to him. While he was attending the university, he often used to stop, mostly on his way home, at precisely this spot. He had done it perhaps 100 times, and gazed intently at the indeed splendid panorama, and to be surprised almost every time by a certain unclear and unresolved impression. An inexplicable chill always breathed on him from the splendid panorama. From him the magnificent picture was filled with a mute and deaf spirit. He marveled each time at this gloomy and mysterious impression, and, mistrusting himself, put off the unriddling of it to some future time. Now suddenly he abruptly recalled these former questions and perplexities. It had seemed no accident to him that he should recall them now. The fact alone that he stopped at the same spot as before already seemed wild and strange to him, as if indeed he could imagine thinking now about the same things as before, and being interested in the same themes and pictures he had been interested in, still so recently. He even felt almost like laughing, yet at the same time his chest was painfully constricted. It was as if now he saw all his former past, and former thoughts, and former tasks, and former themes, and former impressions, and this whole panorama, and himself, and everything, somewhere far down below, barely visible under his feet. It seemed as if he were flying upwards, somewhere, and everything was vanishing from his sight. Inadvertently moving his hand, he suddenly felt the 20-kopeck piece clutched in his fist. He opened his hand, stared at the coin, swung, and threw it into the water. And then he turned and went home. It seemed to him that at that moment he had cut himself off, as with scissors, from everyone and everything. He reached home only towards evening, which meant he had been walking for about 6 hours. Of where and how he came back, he remembered nothing. He undressed and, shivering all over like a spent horse, lay down on the sofa, pulled the greatcoat over him, and immediately sank into oblivion. In the dark of the evening he was jolted back to consciousness by terrible shouting. God, what shouting it was! Never before had he seen or heard such unnatural noises, such howling, screaming, snarling, tears, blows, and curses. He could never even imagined such beastliness, such frenzy. In horror he raised himself and sat up on his bed, tormented, and with his heart sinking every moment. But then fighting, screaming, and swearing, but the fighting, screaming, and swearing grew worse and worse. And then, to his great amazement, he suddenly made out his landlady's voice. She was howling, shrieking, and wailing, hurrying, rushing, skipping over words so that it was even impossible to make anything out, pleading for something, not to be beaten any more, of course, but she was being mercilessly beaten on the stairs. The voice of her assailant became so terrible in its spite and rage that it was no more than a rasp. Yet her assailant was also saying something, also rapidly, indistinctly, hurrying, and spluttering. Suddenly Raskolnikov began shaking like a leaf. He recognized the voice. It was the voice of Ilya Petrovitch. Ilya Petrovitch was here, beating the landlady. He was kicking her, pounding her head against the steps. That was clear. One could tell from the sounds, the screaming, the thoughts. What was happening? Had the world turned upside down, or what? A crowd could be heard gathering on the floors, all down the stairs. Voices, exclamations could be heard. People coming up, knocking, slamming doors, running. But what for? What for? And how can it be? He kept repeating, seriously thinking that he had gone completely mad. But no, he could hear it too, plainly. But in that case, it meant they would also come to him, because it must be on account of on account of yesterday. Lord, he would have liked to fasten the hook on his door, but he was unable to raise his arm. Besides, it was useless. Fear like ice encased his soul, tormented him, numbed him. Then at last, all this uproar, which had gone on for a good 10 minutes, gradually began to subside. The landlady moaned and groaned. Ilya Petrovitch still threatened and swore. Then at last he too seemed to grow subdued. Then no more was heard from him. Has he really gone? Lord! Yes, now the landlady was going too, still moaning and weeping. That was her door slamming shut. Now the crowd on the stairs was breaking up, going back to their apartments, exclaiming, arguing, calling to each other, raising their voices to a shout, then lowering them to a whisper. There must have been many of them. Almost the whole house had gathered. But, God, how can it all be? And why? Why did he come here? Exhausted, Raskolnikov fell back on the sofa, but he could no longer close his eyes. He lay there for about half an hour in such suffering, such an unbearable feeling of boundless horror, as he had never experienced before. Suddenly, a bright light shone on in his room. Nastasia came in with a candle and a plate of soup. Looking at him closely and seeing that he was not asleep, she put the candle on the table and began setting out what she had brought: bread, salt, plate, spoon. I bet you haven't eaten since yesterday. You spent the whole day loafing about, and you shaking all over with fever. Nastasia, why were they beating the landlady? She looked at him intently. Who was beating the landlady? Just now, half an hour ago. Ilya Petrovitch, the police chief's assistant, on the stairs. Why was he beating her so? And why was he here? Nastasia studied him silently, frowning, and went on looking at him like that for a long time. He began feeling very unpleasant, even frightened, under this scrutiny. Nastasia, why are you silent? He finally said timidly, in a weak voice. It's the blood. Whoa. She finally answered softly, as if speaking to herself. Blood! What blood? He murmured, turning pale, and drawing back towards the wall. Nastasia went on looking at him, silently. No one was beating the landlady, she said, again in a stern and resolute voice. He looked at her, scarcely breathing. I heard it myself. I wasn't asleep. I was sitting up, he said. He said, even more timidly. I listened for a long time. The police chief's assistant was here. Everyone came running out to the stairs, from all the apartments. No one was here. It's the blood clamoring in you. When it can't get out and starts clotting up these little clots, that's when you start imagining things. Are you going to eat or what? He did not reply. Nastasia went on standing over him, looking at him steadily, and would not go away. Give me water, Nastasyushka. She went downstairs and came back about 2 minutes later with water in a white earthenware mug, but he no longer remembered what happened next. He only remembered taking one sip of cold water and spilling some from the mug onto his chest. Then came unconsciousness.